Good evening, everyone. This is a special meeting of the school committee. Could we all please rise and salute the flag? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Would the clerk please call the roll?
Mr. Gendron?
Here.
Mr. Leary?
Here.
Ms. Martin?
Here.
Ms. Ross Sikowicz?
Here.
Ms. Scott?
Here.
Mr. Conway?
Here.
Mayor Elliott?
Here.
7 present.
7 present. This is a meeting that was posted, a public hearing for the Lowell School Committee for the purposes of discussing the FY 2015 annual budget. Discussion. Mr. Gendron and then Mr. Conway.
Mr. Mayor, if I could have a point of personal privilege, I have been in contact with the State Ethics Commission regarding a few distant relatives that I have in the employ of the Lowell School Department. And as I expected, the Ethics Commission has told me that these individuals don't represent a conflict to me voting on the budget or participating in union negotiations. However, they did suggest that I make a public disclosure, a 23B public disclosure form that I filled out. I filed with the clerk, and I just want to state that not only does the Ethics Commission indicate that they are not a conflict, that I don't feel pressure or any conflict because of those individuals. So I filed that form, and it's on. The clerk has it. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Gendron. Mr. Conway.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Again, I want to first of all thank the superintendent and especially the deputy superintendent in putting this budget together. However, there seems to be, as far as I'm concerned, there's one particular component that I can see that's missing that is a problem. At least it's a problem to me, and I think that I'd like to make a motion.
Okay, Mr. Conway, before we proceed, and just hold that thought for a second, this is a public hearing, so I've got to proceed with opening the public hearing, and then we'll get into the discussion and ask those members of the public that would like to speak in favor and opposition, and then we'll proceed in that manner, if that's okay.
Thank you, I understand.
Okay. So with that in mind, at this part of the public hearing, we'll open up this portion. For those who are wishing to speak in favor of the budget, anyone wishing to speak in favor? Mr. Georges?
Not sure if I want to speak in favor or not, but I do want to speak.
Well, now's that time to make the decision. You'll have a chance.
Then I'll say in favor until I change my mind.
It wouldn't be you otherwise.
Budget deliberations are always a difficult thing. It takes some planning, and obviously very often you don't have the numbers to know what you can support up until the very end, which was one of the great faults with relying so much on state funding. But a year ago, I came up and spoke during this budget deliberation, and I told you that I thought that you were being shortchanged by several $1 million, particularly concerning the savings, the potential savings in the health insurance trust fund by going to the GIC. At the same time, I talked about the net savings that the school department should be seeing as the health insurance trust fund, which is no longer necessary because we're no longer self-funding our health insurance, as that was being liquidated. And as it ended a couple of months ago, you got the word from the state that indeed the city had shortchanged you several $1 million. There's no magic to it. I just go to all the meetings for the health insurance and find out the numbers. And indeed, the savings were even more dramatic than we had anticipated in the beginning. I suspect it's going to be the same kinds of things now, because what happened last time was, by going from Blue Cross to the GIC, some people just dropped health insurance altogether and took it with their spouse, who maybe had a different offering. So it was a substantial savings. And I think back to a year ago, when $5 million during those deliberations would have made all the difference to the kids, the students that we educate, and staffing purposes, as we had classrooms that were bulging and all kinds of unexpected new kids coming to the door, as happens in traditional public schools like Lowell. My understanding is that this budget still does not, the city still does not fully fund at 100% level. I have no idea why it wouldn't at this point. Last year and the year before, the health insurance savings were primarily from the school department employees. 2/3 of the employees in the city of Lowell are on the school department side. That's substantial.
Mr. Georges, can I just ask you where you're getting your information? Because my understanding is that the city has met its net school obligation completely.
That came as a question, and that's a
So,
question that I was presented.
I just want to make sure that we're not making
I think
inaccurate statements, and I believe that's not an accurate statement.
Well, if it is not an accurate statement, it was a question, so I don't know what the accuracy would be of a question. But the question, and that was being directed to a Jay and so on, a Jay Lang, excuse me. But my understanding was that we were not. It's very often in Lowell, if we get within 95%, which is the absolute minimum that the state requires, we call it 100% because we filled 100% of 95%. But I'm just saying that last year, the major savings, Mr. Elliott, that were made were based upon health insurance savings, and most of the employees in the city of Lowell are on the school department side of the budget. So consequently, those savings were from school department employees. A change in health insurance that we volunteered to go into, as you know, a historic a vote that was taken a couple of years ago to go into the GIC. There was an additional money that was saved, but you never got control of it. And that was the health insurance trust fund money that was initially anticipated. There was going to be $9.6 million to liquidate in the health insurance trust fund. That came out to $12 million. $3 million of that went to the employees. And the PEC, the Public Employee Committee, has control of that, and we've created a mitigation fund to try to offset catastrophic illnesses that people would have. But there was $9 million left. Of that $7.8 million, the city manager at the time put the money as an offset for future retirees, pension costs and health insurance costs. By a mathematical equation of 2/3 for being school department employees, it seems to me very simple that you should have had control of $6 million of that $9 million. But it was handed off and used in a fund to offset future retiree costs for both city and school department employees. And the majority of your employees, meaning teachers, including me, don't get any benefit from the city of Lowell other than health insurance. We get no pension assistance from the city of Lowell because we pay totally into our own state fund, 11% as it is currently. I'm concerned that that money that came from the health insurance trust fund that was set aside for future retirees' costs, that's already been charged to you as a legitimate cost. When the city manager put that money in that fund, he said, I'm putting that against the contribution to the school department from the city of Lowell. I'm very concerned that in the future, as that money is then used to offset costs for retirees both on the city and school department side, you won't get the full benefit of it, and you may get charged again. Now, you have a new city manager, so it's a different set of rules. Okay, I understand that. But I got to be very concerned about it because I saw the struggle that we had last year with bulging classrooms and additional services that would have been so beneficial to our kids. One thing I did do, and I want to offer this to you, is American Federation of Teachers is a large organization, a lot of smart people. A fellow by the name of Jewel Gold is one of their financial geniuses. And I called AFT to see, because obviously there was a lack of oversight for all of a sudden this money to appear, right? For the state to say the contribution wasn't made by the city that should have been made or was anticipated. I'd like to, Jules Gould, and there is a Department of Research and Strategic Initiatives that can do a financial analysis on an ongoing basis to ensure that the school department gets its fair share under law. I want to offer that to you as an opportunity to help monitor the flow of money. The city has done very well over the last few years, financially. No tax increases, or virtually no tax increases. Now there's one coming up. But when you look at the money in reserve, it's substantial. There's a number of good things financially that happened in the city of Lowell. Unfortunately, at a time when we could have used some of that, and we were responsible for some of that savings, it wasn't attributed to us or used by the school department to advance the public schools. If we're not at 100%, Mr. Elliott, I'm not accusing that you are not. I just want to make sure that we are, because there's no reason we shouldn't be. And I want to make sure it's truly 100% of what you're entitled to get. So I will make this offer again. AFT will bring its folks in. They can do it from a distance with public records, the same documents that the city council gets on a monthly basis from the city manager. Do oversight and share information with the school department to assure that we have a full allocation of funds as required under state. And I make that offer. You can decide how you want to do with it. If you want to do anything with it, it's totally up to you. But I just think something went awry a year ago when we find that we're $5 million below halfway through this year, and there had to be an emergency transaction made to kind of bring it down and offset it in this budget. So I just want to leave it with you with that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Georges. Anyone else wishing to speak in favor? I think that was in favor. Anyone else wishing to speak in favor? Hearing none, that portion of the hearing is closed. Anyone wishing to speak in opposition? Bless you. Anyone else wishing to speak in opposition? In opposition? If not, that portion of the hearing is closed. One more housekeeping item, Mr. Conway, before we proceed.
Yes, thank you.
We will need to, as has been the case, we will need to invoke the act of necessity prior to entering into these deliberations in the event that, there are conflicts. I only see Mr. Gendron was the only individual that had a disclosure, but in the past we have taken a vote to invoke the action of necessity, because the school committee will be voting on their own bottom line figure. So entertain a motion by Ms. Ross-Sikowitz, second by Ms. Scott, to vote the action of necessity. Roll call.
Mr. Gendron?
Yes.
Mr. Leary?
Yes.
Ms. Martin?
Yes.
Ms. Ross-Sikowicz?
Yes.
Ms. Scott?
Yes.
Mr. Conway?
Yes.
Mayor Elliott?
Yes.
7 yeas, approved.
Before we proceed with the budget, item 1100, Mr. Conway. Thank you for your patience.
Yes, thank you. I appreciate it, Mr. Mayor. As I said a few minutes ago, I certainly appreciate the superintendent and the staff, and in particular the Deputy Superintendent Jay Lang, in putting together the budget. And I obviously know that there's a tremendous amount of work that has to go into it. Going through the budget, there was something that, as far as I'm concerned, is missing, and I think it's an extremely important component to a budget, and that is funds that would be put aside for collective bargaining. And because of that, I think that at this particular point, I'd like to make a motion to return the budget as is to the superintendent and have her recommend cuts of $1.5 million to be put in a suspense account for the purpose of collective bargaining.
Motion by Mr. Conway that the budget return to the superintendent and return with cuts to the existing budget to the amount of $1.5 million. Those funds to be set aside in the suspense account. Second by Ms. Scott. Discussion? Ms. Martin?
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I certainly appreciate my colleagues' concern, and I think we all have a sense of that. In previous years, we've had, I guess, the luxury of being a little further along in our kind of negotiation process, which gave us a little more I guess, information to deal with, at this point in our budgeting process. This year, we're simply not at that point. I mean, this committee as a whole hasn't had a single conversation, really, that would help us kind of even be able to begin that process. I think that looking at with 1.5 or whatever kind of number we want to look at, I think we simply can't zero in on that at this point. What I would prefer to do, and I obviously would put this before my colleagues, is that as we go through this process, we have traditionally, we go line by line, we make our cuts, we put them into the suspense account. I think any one of us may have different numbers in mind, but I think that has been traditionally the role of the committee to do that, go through that cutting process, recognizing that at the end, we may need to cut deeper, we may feel that we've done an appropriate job once we've gone through one pass at the budget. But I would, for myself, want us to be able to start that process tonight, be able to start the line by line. As we all know, it can take a significant amount of time. And I would hate for us to waste another week in this process. If we could get started tonight and start making some headway, so that we could move forward and be able to, certainly in line with the council's requirements for their voting schedule, be able to report back to them our budget in a more effective way.
Thank you, Ms. Martin. Mr. Gendron?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I agree with the premise that Mr. Conway raises, that not only for collective bargaining, but for potential other needs that we may have as the year goes on, it probably makes sense to put some amount of money in a suspense account for our discretion. However, I think Ms. Martin brings up a good point, and that is that we're here tonight to pour through this budget and perhaps identify items that we want to cut, and that would obviously be those would obviously be things that would go into the suspense account. So, I would be more inclined to say, let's table the motion and go through the budget, see what we can cut, and then if we still feel as though it's insufficient, we have an insufficient amount of money in the suspense account, then we take it up from there and make up the difference by asking the superintendent to go back and take another look at it. Just my thought. If we're here tonight to pour through the budget, why don't we do that first? Take a look at are there items in there that we collectively feel like we could remove before we go back and just say, on a blanket motion, let's cut 1.5 million.
Mr. Conway, then Mr. Leary.
I certainly understand the concerns that my two colleagues just had, and I certainly appreciate it. The fact is that the superintendent and her staff, I think, know the needs and the wants and the concerns. Certainly, they're doing it every single day, and I would certainly like to have the input from them on where they think at this particular time the monies could be a $1.5 million could be put in the suspense account. It doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to agree with all those cuts. But again, I think that when you have a budget with no leeway in there at all, I think it might be advantageous to us that if we give this back to the superintendent and the deputy superintendent, I would assume that they would be able to make those recommendations of $1.5 million probably within a couple days or so. I think that by a delay of a couple days to get their recommendations, I think that it would be certainly helpful to us going forward. Because again, and I'm sure that we are going to have to make some cuts, as Ms. Martin said. But I would like to see what their recommendations would be. And again, I would think that within a couple of days, they could come up with that information. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Conway. Mr. Leary?
Thank you, Mayor. my colleague, I agree with my colleague in terms of like planning or thinking about how you're going to be spending as you get into the collective bargaining agreements. You should have money set aside and budgeted. I don't look them as if they're cuts. I look at it as it's realignment. I'm not looking to cut anything from the bottom line dollar value. I think we do need to be concerned that if we do get in negotiations and there are pay increases, we need to be able to fund them. So it's not, in my perspective, it's not a cut. It's realignment of resources. I agree with Mr. Gendron and Ms. Martin regarding let's begin the process. I think the motion itself might have some merit as we dove further into it. You're looking at a lot of different costs. If you're looking at carryover costs, you're looking at $4.7 million, which 1.1 of it is a deficit that we we created. We need to fill that, so that's an obvious. We're going to fill that one way or the other. We're not going to have that as another cut, and I wouldn't advise having another deficit rollover. It's not an intelligent thing to do. We did it last time because we didn't want to cut anybody's from the personnel, and we wanted to find out if we can manage it effectively going forward. The second issue, too, that we need to know, and I think Mr. Lang and the administration will be able to point this out in the next few weeks, is how much money will we have saved throughout this year? What is that actual number? I think we'll have that in the hopefully next few weeks. That number will be a large part of how we're deciding what we're going to do moving forward. So I don't anticipate that we'll get through the budget tonight, but I do anticipate we can make certain areas where we know we're going to have to make yes votes on, or at least I know I will have to make a yes vote on. Some of the areas, too, in terms of the new costs at the Rogers School, I'd like to go over those in more detail as we come up upon that line item. That's $1.2 million. The other part is the special ed cost. That's $2.1 million. A lot of that I'd like to know more about. Why are we spending that significant amount of money? I know we've had that dialogue throughout the year, but some of it maybe perhaps part of it, the preschool program, the pre-K, maybe the ELAs. That's something I'd like to maybe take a look at as we get more information moving forward. It's a pretty big budget. It's a pretty big process. I appreciate Mr. Conway's thought process in terms of if you're going to get into collective bargaining, you need to be able to budget it. But I think we have a lot to do that we know that we can vote on right now. If we get to a point where we're in a position where folks want additional information, we can definitely take it up at that point in time. Thank you.
Mr.
I
Gendron?
just want to make one more comment, too. I also feel as though, for my own purposes, I'd like to go through this budget tonight for educational purposes. I'd like to understand it completely. Maybe it's because I'm new to the school committee, but I'd like to kind of walk through the line items on this budget and understand what the intent is, where the increases are, where the decreases are fully, rather than just kick it back right now. While I agree with the sentiment, I feel as though it's not, it would be a good idea to walk through it and see where we stand at the end of the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gendron. Ms. Ross-Sigwartz?
Thank you, Mayor. I'm actually inclined to agree with my colleague, Mr. Conway. A budget that doesn't include, we have a fixed cost in terms of our negotiations coming up, and not to have included that, in the budget presented, for me is rather troublesome. We have a lot of competing interests in the district. And we, as we go through line by line, we're actually voting on each of those pieces. So that would be my concern in actually proceeding with going through and voting on this evening as is. And, and I would echo my colleagues' thoughts where, our executive team has a much more insight, thank you, into where we can pare back, perhaps in an effort to set aside those funds in anticipation of union negotiations, which are coming up. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Ross-Sigwartz. Ms. Martin, could you take the chair, please?
The chair recognizes Mayor Elliott.
Thank you, Ms. Martin. I have taken time to go through this budget, and I'm going to support the motion. I'm going to support the motion for this reason. this budget, like any budget, is a planning document. It's the proposed plan based upon the objectives and the goals set forth by this body through prior years and this year's on how to achieve those goals based upon funding certain line items. Who better knows where we can make reductions in a $176 million budget than those that put it together? I have no objection of going through this budget line item by line item, but sometimes to me that's a helter-skelter approach. We start, you start at one particular department, one section, and then, by the time you get to the, halfway through, are we meeting our goal? I'm not so sure that's the best approach based upon the merit of an individual line item. I mean, I've gone through, I'm concerned that we're adding some positions in some areas. We're adding, a physical ed teacher, yet we're taking away, English teachers. I mean, those are the discussions that we probably start to get into that are probably better served by presenting us with a straw proposal. This is what's going to happen with a $1 million cut. This is what's going to happen if it's $1.5 million. This is what's going to happen if it's $2 million. So I do think it's a planning document. I do think moving forward, those costs should be part of it, because at the end of the day, we need to be practical, and being practical includes a cost of living increase for our collective bargaining agreements. We can't be that naive. Nor should we proceed with a $176 million budget, knowing that we've entered into negotiations. We haven't gotten into them that deeply, but to be bargaining in good faith, money should be set aside. So I support sending it back to the administration to come back with recommendations on where and how we can meet that goal of a 1.5 million to set aside, so we're bargaining in good faith with the union. So I do think it makes sense, and getting those reductions. There's $8 million more in this budget given by the city council and the city manager and the city administration. We should be able to address the concerns of collective bargaining as well as other program increases. So I think it makes sense. I think it's a better process. We will get feedback from the administration saying this is where we can continue to meet our goals and objectives, and at the same time satisfy our obligations to our employees. So I think it makes sense. And then at that point in time, if we do need to make further and additional cuts, then we proceed line item by line item. So, the city has met its obligation. I can say from the city manager's perspective, and we're about to have a deliberation on Tuesday with the budget. We've met the obligation, the net school spending. There's $8 million more in this budget. There's nothing else on the city side. Levy is increasing $6.5 million. It's a 3.5% increase. Nothing else on the city side. There's no increases. We barely funded 2 elections. We put on 5 new officers, and that's it. So we need to set aside money for these collective bargaining agreements, and it has to come from within. Thank you.
Mr. Leary.
Just quickly, I appreciate the mayor's comments. I don't think, from my personal standpoint, that I disagree with the process of going through and having the administration make recommendations. I just think some of these items, actually, we know we need to take votes on. I respect differences of opinion on how to achieve that, and we can, we'll take a vote on that, and we'll go forward one way or the other. The only other thing I would say, too, and I didn't say this at the beginning, is I do want to thank the city administration for really coming up and stepping up to the plate, as the manager has said in the past, that he was a very pro-educational individual, and I think this is a good start in building that relationship, and I want to convey my thanks for that start, because I think it's a very positive start. Thank you.
Mr. Conway.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I want to make it perfectly clear that it's not that I'm taking this motion of $1.5 million that we'll be voting on and substituting it for the fact of going line by line. That's not the purpose of it. The purpose is to come up with what we feel, what you feel, is an area or areas that we can cut or eliminate, and still, as my colleague said, and still be able to deliver certainly good services to all our students. And as we go through this process, and that's why I say I think that because you people know this better than anyone else, it should be, I'm sure you can do it in a short period of time. And then we will be going through this budget page by page. There's no doubt about that. But there will be a guide that we will also have of where that 1.5 will be very aware of when we're making those cuts, where that $1.5 million that you and your team have said that we can perhaps live without. And again, I think as the mayor said, we're not going to get any additional money, so I think we have to deal with what we have right now. Again, what this amounts to be quite frank with you, is basically the process almost being exactly the same. It's just what you're doing is delaying a couple days just to get some feedback from the experts of that one for the $1.5 million. Thank you, Madam Chair.
So we'd be moving forward with the initial motion by Mr. Conway that we return the budget to the administration with a request for them to target $1.5 million in additional cuts moving forward. That would be the motion as it stands. Okay. So I would request a roll call vote.
Mr. Gendron?
No.
Mr. Leary?
No.
Ms. Martin?
No.
Ms. Ross Sikowicz?
Yes.
Ms. Scott?
Yes.
Mr. Conway?
Yes.
Mayor Elliott?
Yes.
4 yeas, 3 nays, motion passes.
Moving forward, we would like to set up a time for, another time to set up to receive that budget with the straw proposal of the 1.5 million. Do we want to do it at the next school committee meeting, which is June 18th? Set aside that time for it, or? Yes, motion by Ms. Motion by Ms.
Mayor,
Ross.
if we could, why don't we get an earlier date sometime next week? I know it's going to be, I'm not sure what the schedule is here next Wednesday, but it's kind of, I know Tuesday council meeting, I'm not sure, place in the ZBA who's here on Wednesday, but, and if we could, I mean, if it's a televised meeting, we could maybe do it someplace else as well, but I think we should do it next week. I think that'd be enough time. We gotta really.
Why don't we have, why don't we find out the use of this room, and we'll have Ms. Cormier, or Celine, my staff, send out emails to members of the school committee and set aside a time sometime next week.
Sounds good.
Mr. Mayor?
Mr.
So
Jenner?
I guess we'll try to coordinate schedules with June.
Okay.
Is that the recommendation, that if we have conflicts, we should communicate them to June?
I mean, if the superintendent doesn't mind, either Ms. Cormier or my staff, one of the two, I'll offer both.
Okay, thank you.
Is there any preliminary date that's not good for folks in here for next week? Ms. Scott?
Wednesday, the 11th is the answer
Wednesday,
we said.
11th?
Yep.
Okay, at the least, we have the 18th, the next school committee meeting to discuss it. Mr.
So
Jenner?
just Monday and Tuesday are not appropriate. I can't do Monday or Tuesday.
Okay. All right, why don't we coordinate through Ms. Cormier, and in the meantime, we'll get communications from the superintendent and on time frame when that budget document will be available. Any further discussion? Entertain a motion to adjourn by Ms. Scott, second by Ms. Sikowicz. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Meeting is adjourned. Thank you.